It was just a small package, wrapped in silver paper with blue twine I'd saved from an old bakery box. A pair of socks with tiny planets on them, a folded card with stars on the corners. I wrote to my little explorer, "May you always find joy in small things. I didn't expect a thank you. I'm not foolish like that anymore." But I didn't expect what came next either. 3 days later, I saw the post. His mother, my daughter-in-law, had shared it. A photograph of the unopened package crumpled in the trash bin, captioned with laughing emojis. He blocked me that night. I didn't know right away. I only noticed when my message turned green. I'm Helen Maris, 73. And that was the moment I knew I had finally become invisible to my own blood. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. I raised my son on canned soup and coupons. His father left when he was 10, but I stayed. Through the cold winters, the school pickups, the time he broke his arm and only wanted me near. I stitched his graduation robe by hand, sold my necklace to help with the down payment on their first apartment. When they had their first baby, I waited outside the delivery room for 9 hours with a flask of coffee and a cross-stitch that said, "Home is who you hold." I was there for every birthday until I wasn't. Slowly, I became the afterthought. They said things like, "We didn't think you'd want to travel, and it's just going to be the immediate family." I was already fading by then, but I hadn't yet accepted it. I kept sending little things, a postcard from the lake, a book about stars, a wool scarf I made while watching old movies. No replies, but I told myself they were busy. I told myself love didn't need acknowledgement. Then the trash photo appeared. The socks I'd knitted, the card I'd written, crumpled like waste, laughed at, erased. I stared at the screen for a long time. My heart didn't race. I didn't cry. It was quiet. It felt like a stone being placed on the final grave. I didn't call, I didn't ask why. I closed my phone and sat in the kitchen for hours, listening to the hum of the fridge. When morning came, I emptied the drawer of every card I'd saved, every picture they'd sent when he was small. The ones with crayon smudges, the ones with my name written in a shaky scrawl. Then I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a copy of my will. Another folder held property papers, bank statements, passwords. Everything I had ever saved for them. For him, I read every line, made notes, circled clauses. It felt like sewing again, like careful, deliberate creation. In the weeks that followed, I didn't tell anyone. I visited the courthouse, had quiet conversations with a notary, a clerk, a lawyer named Lynn who didn't ask why I needed to revise everything. She just nodded when I said, "They don't need to be listed anymore." She said, "Understood." I removed their names. Everyone, I gave the lake house to the daughter of an old friend who'd once wheeled me home after a fall. I left the small savings account to a neighbor's son who'd mowed my lawn each summer. Without asking, piano went to a school that still taught children how to sit still and listen. I added one clause at the end, no further revisions allowed. I signed it with a calm hand. Then I packed a bag, dresses, a coat, my wedding ring in a small cloth pouch. I left the house keys with the lawyer, she said again. Understood. I left the town I had lived in for 41 years. They didn't notice. Not right away. It took 3 weeks before the texts started coming. "Are you okay? Why is your number disconnected? Where are you?" Then came the voicemails. "You're scaring people, Mom. You can't just disappear." But I could. And I did. I found a room at a small motel near the sea. It had a kitchenette, a television from 1994, and a soft chair that didn't match the carpet. The woman who ran it called me ma'am until I asked her to use my name. She brought me tea when it rained. I began to walk each morning, bought oranges from a roadside stand, sat in the sun with a library book and didn't check my phone because I didn't have one anymore. A boy from the next room, maybe 9 or 10, saw me knitting one day and asked what I was making. Said, "Just a shape." He sat on the step beside me and watched until his mother called him. A week later, I left. The shape by his door, it wasn't much. It's just a square with uneven corners. He taped it to the window like it mattered. They kept trying to find me. My son sent a letter through Lynn. It was short. Said they hadn't meant it. That kids do things without thinking. That they'd wanted to reach out. Ended with, "He misses you." I read it once. Then I placed it in the drawer beside the motel. Bible. That night, I sat by the sea with a thermos of cocoa and thought about all the ways people miss you. When it's already too late, I didn't reply. Not out of anger. Just because silence is sometimes the only honest answer left. I still knit, still walk each morning, still leave small shapes behind in the hands of strangers, in the cracks of driftwood tucked into the corners of this soft, borrowed life. The woman at the motel calls me Miss Helen now. She said the boy's mother wants to learn to knit. She asked if I'd teach them both. I nodded. Said I'd like that this morning. I burned the last photograph I had of him, my grandson, in his little explorer pajamas, holding a rocket-eyed. Sent him once, the ashes scattered quickly. They didn't cling. It felt like forgiveness, the kind that doesn't need to be said. And this time, I decide who gets to call me anything else. Before it all broke, my life was a quiet rhythm. I don't mean happy, not always, but consistent, predictable. The kettle whistled at 7, mail came at 10. My son used to call on Sundays, just after his second coffee and before they went to the park. That changed too. Slowly, everything. There's a difference between losing someone and being slowly removed by them? I didn't notice at first. It starts with short calls, missed birthdays, forgotten details. You find yourself repeating stories they no longer find charming. You offer to help, and they say, "We've got it covered." And then you realize they've stopped asking altogether. His name is Daniel, my only child. I had him when I was 22. We were poor. I was scared. But I held him like he was proof that something good could come from being alone. He had a colicky cry that rattled the windows, and I loved every awful minute of it. I used to hum to him while I rocked him, swaying in that chair by the radiator until we both fell asleep. When his father left, Daniel was 10. He didn't ask why, just stopped bringing home drawings of the three of us. I told him I'd stay, and I meant it. I worked extra shifts at the pharmacy, then cleaned houses on weekends. I stitched buttons back on his school uniforms. I stood at bake sales, church fairs, parent-teacher nights, holding the corners of his life so they wouldn't. Freydot, he was a good boy. Kind once. He used to run into my arms after school, hold tight like I was the anchor that kept him from drifting. Even in high school, he'd sit with me while I chopped vegetables, ask about my day. It faded in college, as it should. Supposed to pull away, grow? But there's a difference between growing up and growing distant. He met her, his second year of college. She was polished, ambitious, one of those girls who says the right things but never really looks at you when she speaks. Still, I tried. I smiled, brought pies when I visited. I gave space. I knew what it meant to make room for someone else's future. When they married, I offered them the house, just until they got on their feet. They stayed 3 years. 3 long years where I learned how invisible you can become in your own kitchen. She didn't like my cooking, said it smelled old. She asked if I'd wear a different perfume, something lighter. She rearranged my living room while I was out one day, said it needed energy flow. Daniel said nothing, just smiled the way people do when they don't want to get involved. When they moved into their new place, I bought them a set of plates from my mother's collection. Blue porcelain, painted with birds. Mia left them in the box, said they didn't match her aesthetic. Still, I came when called. I babysat when the nanny had a cold. I cleaned when Mia's mother was visiting. I never stayed long. The air felt thinner in their house. I always left before dinner. Not because they told me to, but because they didn't tell me to stay. When their son was born, Liam, I sat in the waiting room with a blanket I'd crocheted over the course of 9 months. Every stitch held a hope, a memory, a small piece of breath. They thanked me, politely. Mia placed it on the back of the couch like decoration. I never saw it used. As Liam grew, my place in his life was already shrinking. She called me Grandma Helen in front of him, like I was a guest. She corrected me once when I sang an old lullaby, said it was outdated. Daniel said, "Let's not make this complicated." As if love was something messy, like spilled milk. As if my presence was noise instead of music. I sent birthday gifts, quiet ones, thoughtful ones, little books, handmade toys, a sweater in his favorite color. They were acknowledged with emojis, if at all. When I asked if I could take him to the planetarium, the same one I'd taken Daniel to as a boy, Mia said he was too busy. She said he had a full schedule, that he needed structure. And I did what so many mothers do, swallowed. The grief folded it down like laundry, smiled through it, thinking maybe next time, until the socks, till the card, until I realized I'd been showing up to a play that had already recast my role. After he blocked me, I scrolled through years of messages, all the pictures I'd sent, the recipes, the check-ins. And I saw it all at once, the slow erasure, the way they'd nodded and smiled and edited me out. Frame by frame, the love I'd poured into that family had become inconvenient, unwanted, decorative at best. People like Mia don't scream. They don't slam doors or write cruel letters. They just smile and turn off the light behind you. Daniel let her. Maybe that's the part that still wakes me in the night. Not that she didn't want me, that he didn't. I remember the day I stopped making excuses for him. It wasn't dramatic. Just a morning where I realized I hadn't received a call in 6 weeks. And that nothing in my life depended on him anymore. That's when I began printing documents. Not out of spite, out of survival. If I was going to be alone, then I would. Be alone on my own terms. No more waiting by the phone. No more folding my heart into corners where it didn't fit. That's when I started to become real again. Not just a memory in their margins, but someone solid. And that was the first good day I'd had in a very long time. The envelope came 2 weeks after the socks. No return address. Just my name and handwriting that used to fill my birthday cards. Crooked and rushed, but familiar. Inside, a single printed page. A family photos. It had been taken on Liam's birthday, the same day I'd mailed the gift. We're all in matching navy sweaters, standing in front of a balloon arch. Daniel held Liam on one hip. Mia had her hand resting on Daniel's shoulder. Her parents stood at the center, smiling like they'd always belonged. And I wasn't there. Not even as a shadow in the background. Not even in the list of tag names. In the corner, written in pen, were 5 words. We didn't think you'd mind. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I stared at the photo for a long time, then slipped it back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer with the others. The drawer that had become an archive of absence. That night, I poured a glass of water, sat by the kitchen window, and watched the neighbors' lights flicker off one by one. I thought about the first time Daniel had drawn me a picture. A stick figure with arms too long and a note that said, "Mommy is magic." I remembered how he'd once panicked when I was late picking him up. How his eyes searched the parking lot like I was the only face that could calm him. I thought about how, quietly, all of that had vanished. There was no fight, no explosion, just a steady forgetting, like water wearing down stone. I looked around my house at the framed photo of him as a toddler. The crocheted animals I'd kept for Liam, the shelf of cookbooks with my grandmother's penciled notes still inside. All of it felt like a museum. No one visited anymore, and that's when I saw it. Really saw it. The truth I had been dodging for years. I had spent my entire life making room for others, shrinking myself to fit their expectations, giving without question. And now I had been erased politely, efficiently, with a smile. The betrayal wasn't in a scream. It was in the silence, in the way they had trained me not to expect kindness anymore. That night I pulled out every legal folder I had. Every account. Every policy. I spread them on the table like puzzle pieces, and for the first time I began putting them together for me. I called Lynn in the morning, told her I was ready. She asked no questions. She said, "Let's begin." We started with the will. I removed Daniel, removed Mia, removed Liam. Every time I crossed out a name, I felt something release inside me. Not anger, but relief. Like closing a book I'd been pretending to enjoy, I added new names. People who had seen me, a neighbor who left soup on my doorstep after my fall last winter. It's a librarian who'd driven me home during the snowstorm. It's a young woman from church who'd helped me carry groceries without being asked. To them, I left the house, the money, the things I'd been saving for people who no longer saw me as anything but a memory they hadn't made. I updated my medical directives. Power of attorney. Everything had once gone to Daniel. I changed all of it. As punishment. But because love should never have to beg to be remembered. When I finished, Lynn looked at me across her desk and said, "Is there anything else?" I said, "Yes. I want a clause." She raised an eyebrow. I continued, "I want it in writing that no one listed in the previous version is to be contacted, included, or notified. I want the silence to be legal." She nodded once and wrote it in dot. It was the most peace I'd felt in a decade. The next morning, I opened a new email account. I used a different name. I contacted a storage facility on the coast, one I'd read about in a magazine. Clean, discreet, climate-controlled. I booked a unit. Then I rented a car. It's just for the weekend, I told myself. I packed with care. My wedding ring, a faded photo of my parents, 3 dresses. A scarf Daniel once gave me when he still loved me. The quilt I'd made the winter after my mother died. I left everything else. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. Before I walked out, I wrote a note. Not to them. To myself, it said, "You are not a ghost. You are a door." I locked the door. Behind me, dropped the keys in Lynn's mailbox. And drove. For the first hour, I didn't turn on the radio. Listened to the wheels hum and the quiet ache inside me shift, not vanish, but move. Like a bruise starting to heal. I didn't cry, not once. There was something holy in the silence. Like finally hearing your own name after years of being mispronounced. I checked into the motel under the name June Ellis, my mother's middle name. It felt right. The woman behind the counter smiled and handed me the key. Said, "You here for up?" "Rest?" I said. "Yes." She said, "You're in 3B. It's quiet there." Perfect. Quiet was exactly what I'd earned that night. I fell asleep with the window open. The breeze was cool and smelled faintly of salt. I dreamed of nothing. And it was the best sleep I'd had in years. I stayed in 3B for 19 days. The first 3, I barely moved. Just breathed. The silence felt strange at first. Not heavy, just unfamiliar. Like trying on a coat that fit better than you remembered. There was no television noise, no buzzing phone, no updates from Daniel, no calendar reminders for Liam's recital. I hadn't been invited anyway. I sat at the small round table by the window and watched light move across the carpet. Morning sun came in like it was searching for something. Afternoon shade slipped in quietly and left without asking. By evening, I made tea from the motel's stale bags and pretended it tasted like the rose hip I used to buy from that shop near the old library. Pretending was still allowed. It was pretending that kept me going all those years. Pretending I mattered, pretending I was still part of something. But here, I didn't have to perform anymore. I could just be. Invisible on purpose. Every morning, I took a walk. Not far, just past the gas station, down the gravel path behind the chain-link fence. To the patch of trees that smelled faintly, of cedar and dust. Some days I sat on a broken bench and let the breeze undo the knots in my chest. Some days I brought the notebook. It was an old ledger book I found in the glove compartment of the rental car. Inside, I started writing down the things I remembered about myself. Not as a mother or a wife, but just me. Helen, age 73. Likes toast with too much butter. Can't stand mint toothpaste. Once wanted to learn how to press flowers into glass frames, but never did. Favorite season, early fall, when sweaters return but leaves haven't turned yet. There were pages and pages. I was surprised how much I remembered. I thought I'd been erased. But no, I had just been crowded out. One afternoon, I heard a soft knock, not at my door, but next door, 3A. A boy's voice, then a woman, laughter. Later that day, I saw them outside. The boy was playing with a plastic rocket, the kind that lights up if you shake it. The woman, his mother, I assumed, looked tired. Not in the careless way Mia always did, but in the way people look when they've been holding too much for too long. She glanced at me. I gave her the kind of nod women share when we don't know how to say, "I see you," out loud. She smiled back. The next day, I left a small bundle on their doorstep. A knit square, nothing special, just something soft. Tucked inside, a note. If you ever want to learn, I have more yarn than I need. By dusk, there was a gentle knock on my door. It was the boy, he said. "My mom says it's okay if you show me how." I said, "Of course." We sat on the floor by the heater. I let him pick a color. He chose deep green, the kind of green that reminds you of pine trees and rain. He asked if I had grandkids. I paused. I said, "I did." Kay said, "Did they move away?" I said, "Something like that." He didn't push, just nodded. And we kept going. Later, his mother joined us. Her name was Grace. She didn't wear perfume. She didn't talk over me. She didn't look at her phone once. We talked about nothing and everything. About how she and her son had been on the road for a while. About the job she was trying to get. About how hard it was to be a single mother in a world that expected you to smile while drowning. She said, "Sometimes it feels like we're not real to anyone." I said, "I know the feeling." And I meant it. In her, I saw a version of myself younger. Maybe stronger in some ways, but carrying the same ache. The ache of being needed and then discarded. Of being praised when convenient and forgotten when not. Over the next week, we became something, not quite friends, not quite family. But something. Solid dot. We shared soup. We swapped books. She showed me how to use a modern phone camera. I hadn't taken a photo of myself in years. She snapped one of me holding my knitting and said, "You look peaceful." I said, "That's because I am." One night as her son slept curled on the carpet, with a blanket I'd made, Grace asked, "Why are you here?" "Really?" I told her the truth. Not all of it. Just enough. I said I gave my whole life to people who left me behind. And now I'm finally giving a little of it back to myself. She nodded. Not surprised, not pitying. Just knowing. She said, "That's brave." I hadn't thought of it that way, but maybe it was. There's a strange thing that happens when you disappear. People expect you to beg for return, to explain yourself, to shrink so they feel bigger. But I didn't want back in. I didn't want Daniel's voice cracking with guilt. I didn't want Mia's rehearsed apologies. I didn't want Liam's confused glances when they told him Grandma got upset about something. I wanted this, the quiet, the air that didn't weigh me down, the mornings that didn't start with silence on a phone screen. I wanted the slow walks, the cracked sidewalk, the boy with the green yarn, the woman who didn't ask me to change. I hadn't run away. I'd walked toward something, and every day I walked a little further, toward the version of me I thought I'd lost. The one who laughed alone, who stitched without an audience, who mattered even when no one said so. Grace asked if I'd ever go back. I said, "I think I already went back one too many times," and I meant it. That night I sat at the window again. The light was softer now. Even the darkness felt kind. I didn't feel erased anymore. I felt written, finally, in my own handwriting. And this time, no one else got to hold the pen. On the 20th morning, I folded my nightgown into the smallest square I could manage and tucked it beside my notebook. I wasn't leaving. Not yet. But something had shifted. The motel felt less like a hiding place now, and more like a waiting room. Not the kind where you dread what's next. The kind where you finally exhale. Where you sit with yourself and realize you're not the problem, just the only one who stopped pretending. I walked to the post office that day, bought a new envelope, a thick one. Inside it, I placed a single page. The revised will, signed, witnessed. Final, I didn't write a note. Didn't explain, didn't include a return address, just his name. Daniel Maris, in my handwriting, not for spite, for truth. A truth I'd never had the courage to say out loud. When I dropped it into the blue box, my hand didn't shake. I didn't. Look back. I walked away like I'd just let go of a weight I'd carried since his first lie of omission. Since the first time he watched me be insulted and stayed silent. Since he learned to look through me like I was wallpaper, familiar but not worth noticing. The motel clerk, Beth, asked if I was doing okay. I told her better than I have in years. She smiled in that small, slow way people do when they know not to push. She said there was an extra room opening if I ever wanted a bit more space. I thanked her and said I'd think about it. But the truth is, space wasn't the issue anymore. Not physical space. It was the emotional kind I'd finally carved out. The kind that doesn't shrink when someone frowns. The kind you protect like a locked garden dot. Later that week, Grace knocked with 2 cups of coffee and an offer. Her sister had found her a job, part-time, clerical, and she'd be moving. In a few days, she said it softly, like an apology. I told her there was nothing to be sorry for. I said she'd built something beautiful here. Said you taught me I wasn't alone in the dark. She looked down, said you lit the match. The boy Noah hugged me around the waist. He said, I'll write you letters. I said, I'll send you yarn. We shook on it. That night, after they'd gone back to their room, I sat with my knitting in my lap and listened to the quiet. I didn't feel abandoned, not this time. Some goodbyes don't hurt. Some are soft closures, like pages turning at the right place. The next morning, I made a list. Not of chores, not groceries, not things to fix, just names. People who had made me feel real in the last year. It's the pharmacist who remembered my birthday. The cab driver who waited until I got inside. Librarian who'd let me keep a book an extra week because she said the ending hits harder if you take your time. I mailed each of them a small card. Not long. Just thank you for seeing me. Some replied, some didn't. That wasn't the point. There's power in gratitude that doesn't expect applause. A week passed before the storm arrived. Not the weather. The panic. It started with a voicemail. Lynn forwarded it to my email. Daniel's voice, breathless, clipped. Mom, I don't understand. Why would you do this? Why would you cut Liam out? I never meant for it to get like this. Please call me, please. Then a message from Mia, tight, cold, controlled. If this is about that post, you could have just said something. We're all under stress. You don't have to blow everything up. There it was. The reframe, the rewrite. As if I were the explosion. I didn't reply. I let them spin. Let the silence answer for me. They kept calling. Blocked numbers, unknown senders. One even came from Daniel's office line. Still, I didn't pick up. I listened to the voicemails in the dark, just once each. Some angry, some desperate, some rehearsed with too much care. I didn't respond because they weren't asking where I was. They were asking where their safety had gone. I'd been their net, their quiet backup, their always yes. And now that I'd cut the net, they were falling. And I didn't owe them a landing. Lynn called to check in. She asked if I was feeling okay with the fallout. I said I expected it. She paused, then said, good, because they're asking if I can share your address. I said, no. That was the point. She said, understood. I liked that about her. She didn't use too many words. She'll let the firm ones stand. I went to the beach that afternoon. 'Twas overcast, the kind of sky that makes the water look pewter. I brought no bag, no yarn, just my notebook and a pen. I sat on a low rock and watched the waves pull back like breath. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. I thought about all the things I'd been taught a woman should be. pleasant, forgiving, selfless, soft. But no one tells you that softness, when unguarded, becomes silence, and silence becomes disappearance. I was done disappearing. I wrote one sentence in the notebook. Let them learn how to miss me. Then I closed it. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled without apology. The next wave didn't come from Daniel. It came from Mia's sister, Lila. I hadn't spoken to her in over 5 years. She'd always stayed on the edges of things, pleasant enough at holidays, sharp when unobserved. She once told me, without blinking, that older women should know when to give space. I remember smiling at her and folding the napkin in my lap more tightly now. Her name appeared in my inbox. The subject line, some clarity would help. No greeting, no warmth. Just a long paragraph that read more like a performance than a plea. She wrote that Daniel was under enormous pressure, that Mia had felt unsupported since the beginning, that I had misread intentions, taken things too personally, and reacted out of proportion. Out of proportion. That phrase settled in my stomach like rust. As if the years I spent stitching my love into wool and silence meant nothing. As if watching my grandson's gift thrown in the trash should have been brushed off like dust on an old coat, she said. The family was reeling. That they hadn't expected someone like me to create such a rupture, and then tucked at the end. You've made your point. Now please come home. I didn't answer. I let the message float there unopened a second time. Unread in any way that would comfort her, because I wasn't trying to make a point. I wasn't interested in being right. I was interested in being real, and the truth was, I had never left. Home, I had simply returned to the part of myself they taught me to hide. When you live long enough as an accessory in other people's lives, you begin to believe that's all you are. A holiday card name, a guest in the background. A quiet presence, with no story of her own, but I did have a story. I just never asked to hear it. The motel phone rang 2 days later. Beth, the clerk, knocked gently on my door, holding the receiver with both hands like it carried something delicate. She whispered, "It's a young boy. He asked for you by name." I stood very still, not because I was afraid, but because I knew it would be Liam. Of course it would be Liam. I took the phone. The cord curled like a question mark between us. His voice was hesitant, small, just a breath above the hum of static. He said, "Hi, Grandma." I closed my eyes. Let that word hit all the places it hadn't touched in years. He said, "I asked Dad where. You went and he said you were mad. Are you mad?" I said, "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad." He waited, then asked, "Did I do something wrong?" That nearly broke me. But I held the pause. Held it gently. I said, "You didn't do anything wrong. You're just young. And sometimes adults make choices that aren't fair to children." He said, "I miss you. I liked the socks. I saw them in the trash, but I took them out and I wear them when it's cold." I felt my throat close, not with pain, but with something softer. Something like sorrow dressed in gratitude. I told him, "That means a lot to me." He said, "Can I see you?" I looked out the window. Sky was streaked with gray. Single bird sat on the power line, not moving, just watching. I said, "Maybe one day, but not right now." He said, "Will you write me?" I said, "Yes, that I can do," he whispered. "Okay, I'll wait." Then the line clicked. I handed the phone back to Beth. She didn't ask, just nodded and walked away. That night I wrote him a letter. Plain. Paper. No embellishments. No false promises. I told him I loved him, that I always had and always would. Sometimes adults forget how to be kind. Sometimes they don't know how to say sorry, so they pretend there's nothing to fix. I told him it wasn't his job to fix it, that growing up is hard enough. I told him about the stars on his socks, how I'd chosen them because he reminded me of something big and full of possibility. I signed it. "Your grandma, Helen?" I didn't ask permission. I mailed it to the school address, addressed to his teacher with a note that said, Please give this to Liam if it's okay with his parents. I knew they might intercept it. Mia would call it manipulation. Daniel would call it complicated. But I didn't care anymore, 'cause even if he never received it, I had written it. And in that small act, I had told the truth. A week later, I received no reply, which meant either it never reached him or they'd chosen silence. Either way, I'd already let it go, because now I understood something I hadn't before. There is a difference between being shut out and choosing to step away. The first makes you feel helpless. The second makes you feel free. One is grief. The other is grace. I stepped outside that morning and saw that someone had left a bag of apples at my door. No note, just fruit. Crisp, kind. I took one and bit into it slowly, juice running over my thumb. And in that quiet sweetness, I felt something open again. Not to them. To me, because the truth is, you can love someone deeply and still walk away. You can wish them peace and still close the door. You can send a letter and not wait for an answer. You can live a life that no longer includes the people you once lived for, and it can still be whole, still be sacred, still be yours. I started building a new kind of life in the small moments, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that grows quietly, like moss over stone. I rearranged the furniture. In the motel room, just a chair angled toward the window and a lamp I brought from a thrift store down the road. I crocheted a cover for the pillow on the bed, not for comfort, but to remind myself I could still make something that stayed. Beth let me keep a small hot plate in the corner, as long as I promised not to burn the place down. I boiled lentils with garlic and cumin, chopped tomatoes, brewed tea in an old enamel pot that reminded me of my mother. I started walking further, past the path near the fence, down to the beach where the tide left behind broken shells and tangled nets. Every morning I'd carry one small item back. A stone, a bit of driftwood, a bottle cap, rusted soft around the edges. I lined them on the windowsill like offerings, not to anyone, just to the quiet. One afternoon, I sat by the shoreline and watched a girl teach her younger brother to skip stones. She was maybe 12, careful and stern. He was clumsy but determined. She kept saying no, like this flick, not throw. He kept messing it up, but he smiled every time. I smiled too, 'cause I wasn't thinking of Daniel or Liam or anyone who had made me feel small. I was thinking about how long it had been since I let a day pass without grief in the room, and how it felt to finally open the window and let it leave. A week after Grace and Noah moved out, I received a letter, handwritten, folded carefully. It was from Noah. He had drawn a picture of us knitting, and a rocket ship with a scarf trailing behind it like a comet tail. At the bottom he wrote, "I told my teacher about you. She said I should write a report on someone brave. So I picked you." I read it 3 times, then tucked it into my ledger notebook. Not for safekeeping, but because it belonged there. In the record of who I still was, that evening I walked to the diner. The same one I'd passed every day but never entered. It had linoleum floors and chipped mugs and a waitress named Charlene who didn't write anything down. I ordered pie. Just pie. Lemon meringue. She asked if I wanted coffee with that. I said yes, even though I didn't, because sometimes yes is how you start. I sat by the window and watched the light shift. The pie was tart and perfect. The coffee was too strong, and I drank every drop. Charlene refilled it without asking. Said, "You look like someone who's done a lot of listening." I smiled. Said, "I've had practice." She nodded like she understood. And I think she did. That night, I slept with the window open. The wind rattled the blinds, and I didn't mind. It sounded like the sea coming closer, like the world shifting just slightly in my favor. The next morning, I bought a new sweater. From the church sale, navy blue with buttons, like sea glass. It didn't fit quite right, a little loose in the shoulders, but I liked the weight of it. Like armor that didn't look like armor. I wore it on my walk and passed a group of kids waiting for the school bus. One of them dropped their lunch bag. I bent to hand it back. He said thanks without looking up, then paused. Said, I like your sweater. I said, thanks, it's mine. And I meant it. Not just the sweater, the moment, the morning, the life. It was mine now. I returned to the library. It's the one I'd signed up for on my second week here, but never used. It's the woman behind the desk. Remembered my name. She said, I thought we lost you. I said, no, I just needed time. She handed me a book on bird migration. Said, you look like someone who watches things carefully. I did. I do. I took the book to the bench near the trees and sat under a sky that was finally beginning to turn from winter. A single bird landed on the branch above me, something small and persistent. It tilted its head as if to say, are you still here? I was. I thought of Daniel, not with anger. Not even with sorrow. Just as a fact, like weather from a week ago. It happened. It passed. I thought of Liam and how his voice trembled when he said he liked the socks. I hoped he still wore them, even if he didn't know why. I hoped he'd remember the softness, not the silence, and if one day he searched for me, really searched, he'd find not a ghost, but a woman who kept going, who turned her own absence into a presence she could live with. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote just 5 words. Begin again, gently, for good. Then I folded the page in half, slid it under the vase on the dresser. In the morning, I'd go to the post office and rent a box, a real address. Not for anyone else. It's for me, because I wasn't just passing through anymore. I was staying, okay? And that too was mine. It happened on a Wednesday, a day like any other. Cloudy, mild, a breeze that smelled faintly of rain. Beth knocked softly on my door, just once, like she always did when the mail had come. She didn't wait for me to answer. She just left the envelope on the mat, polite, as always, like she understood that even kindness needs to be quiet sometimes. I picked it up slowly. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Daniel's still too neat, still trying to. Hard dot. I stood there for a long time before I opened it. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I knew it wouldn't change anything. The letter was short, carefully worded. It's like someone trying not to say too much, but still say the right thing. He wrote that Liam missed me, that he was asking more questions, that Mia was still upset, but he was trying to understand what had happened. Really understand? He said he hadn't known how deep the hurt had gone. He said he never meant for it to feel like exile. He used that word, exile, as if he finally saw it, as if he'd stood in the space where I used to be and noticed it was empty. He ended with, I would like to see you. Alone, if you'll allow it. There was a phone number, a time, a cafe a few towns over. Tomorrow afternoon, I sat down with the letter in my lap and watched the ceiling. The plaster had a crack like a line of poetry that never finished. I followed it with my eyes over and over until the daylight started to slip away. I didn't need to go. I knew that. I owed him nothing, but something in me, not forgiveness, not obligation, something quieter than either, stirred Dot. Not because I wanted him back, but because I wanted to look him in the eye and not disappear this time. I wore the navy blue sweater with the sea glass. Buttons I left early, took the long road, the one that winds along the water. I didn't bring the letter, didn't bring my notebook. I didn't need reminders of anything. The cafe was small, wooden chairs, chipped mugs, a chalkboard menu. That hadn't changed since 1998. He was already there, sitting at a table in the back, facing the door. Like he was afraid I wouldn't come unless I saw him first. He stood when I walked in. Reflex? Guilt? Maybe? He looked older, tired, not in the way people age, but in the way people live with a story they never finish telling. I sat down. He waited. I didn't say anything. Not yet. The server came. I ordered tea. He didn't order anything. He said, "Thank you for coming." I nodded. Still nothing in my chest. Just quiet. He said I didn't know how far gone it was. I said, "You never." Asked Dot that stopped him. He looked down, touched the edge of the napkin like it might unravel in his hand. He said, "I let it happen. I let them push you out because it was easier than standing up. I thought, she'll always be there. I didn't answer, 'cause I had been, till I wasn't. He said I saw the revised will. I looked at him. He wasn't angry, just hollow-tot. He said it shook me. I said, good. He nodded. Didn't flinch. He said Liam still wears the socks. Every time it gets cold. He won't let anyone wash them. He calls them his space feet. I felt something in my throat then. Not grief, not pride. Just the shape of what it meant to be remembered without being forced to stay. He said he thinks. You live by the sea now. He says you send messages in bottles. I smiled, said maybe I do. We sat there a while. Let the silence be the conversation. He said I don't expect you to come back. I just needed to tell you that I see it now. Everything. You gave everything I ignored. I see it. Too late, maybe? But I do. I said then let that be enough. He blinked. Not tears, just surprise. As if he'd prepared for anger and didn't know what to do with calm. I said, you don't get to rewrite it, but you can remember it differently now. He nodded again, said thank you. I stood. Buttoned the top of the sweater. The wind had picked up outside. He asked, can Liam write to you? I said if he wants to. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a drawing, stars, planets, and a little gray-haired figure with a scarf. No note, just a heart drawn next to the figure. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I walked out before he could stand again. Let the door close gently. Behind me, I drove back with the windows open. Sky had cleared. The sea looked endless. I didn't feel restored. I didn't feel healed, but I felt like myself. And that was enough. When I reached the motel, I hung the drawing above my bed. Not as a reunion, but as a reminder that some love stays, even if the people don't. That some messages make it to shore. That some scars are not endings. They're proof you survived. And when Beth asked if everything went okay, I said, I kept my name, kept my peace. And she nodded, like that was more than enough. The sea is louder some days, not angry, just certain it doesn't ask permission to return to the shore. Just does. Again and again. I've stayed longer than I thought I would. At first, the motel was a stopgap, place to catch my breath after years of being held underwater by my own family. But something happened in the stillness. I remembered how to belong. To myself. The room is still small, still plain. Curtains are thin, the mirror warped. But it holds me. It sees me when no one else is looking. I've added small things. A plant I bought from the market, its pot chipped at the corner. A second-hand clock with hands that tick too loudly, but always tell the truth. A string of postcards above the dresser, each one from somewhere I haven't been, but might go. The days pass without apology. I make toast in the mornings, knit in the afternoons, take walks just before sunset. It's enough. No one tells me I take up too much space here. Number 2. One asks me to be less. There is no daughter-in-law rearranging the furniture while I'm out. No birthday dinners I'm left out of. No photos posted online where my absence is the joke. I think that's what people don't understand about quiet women. We're not weak. We're just tired of shouting into a room where no one's listening. Last week, I bought a new notebook. The old one was full, not just of words, but of weight. This one is thinner, lighter. I've only written one thing inside it, so far. This piece cost me everything I used to think I needed. Daniel hasn't written again. Neither has Mia. Liam sent me a letter through the school. A drawing of a rocket. Another of me with stars in my hands. No words. Just a sticker that said Explorer approved. I keep it in the drawer beside my bed. Not because I expect more, but because it reminded me of who I used to be to him and who I still am, in a small, unspoken way. I don't plan to return. Not to the house. Not to the life where my name was only called when something needed cleaning or cooking or forgiving. I have forgiven in my own way. But I've also forgotten. It's not the pain that stays, but the parts of me that waited too long for the kind of love that was never coming. Sometimes people confuse forgiveness with softness. They expect that if You forgive, you'll also return. They think if you're kind, you'll be quiet. But I've learned that you can be soft and still shut a door forever. Last night, I burned the last photo. Not of Liam, never him, of me in their house. Standing beside a table, I set a cake I baked. A family who smiled for the camera and looked through me moments later. I watched the edges curl, then turned the ashes into the wind. It felt like erasing a role I'd been forced to play. Not the grandmother, not the mother. The woman who waited for her worth to be recognized. I don't wait anymore. I still visit the diner. Charlene saves me the lemon meringue now. She says, "It's good to see a regular with purpose in her walk." I smile and tell her it's the shoes, but it's not. It's the knowing. I know now that family isn't built in blood alone. It's built in gestures, in who checks on you when you're quiet, in who listens without rehearsing their reply, in who makes room for your silence without calling it distance. Grace still writes, "He sent me a video of him skipping a stone 3 times. I watched it 10 dots. Sometimes they call me Miss Helen, sometimes just Helen. And I like both, 'cause neither one erases me. I don't miss the holidays. I light a candle for myself on birthdays. I bake one small cake. I write a letter each year, too. No one in particular, just a record of the woman I'm still becoming. This year's letter ended with, 'You stayed, even after they left.' That's enough. I walk past the post office most days now. I have a box there just in case. Some days it's empty. Days it holds kindness from a stranger. Card. A pressed flower. A child's drawing left with no name. I answer when I can. When I want to. This morning, I watched the tide come in and realized it had been almost a year since I left. Since I stopped waiting. Since I remembered I was real. I found a shell near the shoreline. Smooth, whole. Inside, a faint spiral. I named it Peace. I didn't take it with me. I left it. On the driftwood by the rocks. Maybe someone else will find it. Maybe they'll hold it in their palm and understand something without needing to say it aloud. We don't need to be monuments to survive. Sometimes we just need to stop handing our story to people who won't read it. I am not returning. And I am not hiding. I'm simply choosing the path no one expected me to take. The one where I matter to myself, when no one's watching. And if one day someone asks what happened to me, why I left, why I stopped answering, why I gave the house away, why I disappeared from their holiday tables and family threads, they can read the silence for themselves. It's all there, in the space where I used to stand and smile while shrinking, in the gaps between their photos, in the questions they're too proud to ask out loud, and in the shell by the sea that waits without begging to be found. This time, I decide who gets to call me anything else.